When I first became acquainted with chess, I read tales about chess cafes in the 16, 17, and 1800s, their ambiance, the incredible popularity they engendered, their rich history. These legendary establishments ignited my imagination and turned chess the game into something mysterious, yet also warm and human. The most famous cafe of all, the Café de la Régence, first appeared in 1670. It rapidly became the toast of the city's literati, and by 1740, ruled Paris's chess culture until it closed in 1916. Over the years, its guest list grew and eventually turned into a who's who of brilliant men who had a deep affection for chess. Voltaire, Benjamin Franklin, Rousseau, Robespierre, and Napoleon, just to name a few. Elsie Lasker Schuler, the famous Bohemian playwright poetess, who also happened to have married the second official world chess champion's brother, visited many Berlin cafes and pointed out that quite a few had a large choice of newspapers and some even had a newspaper waiter. She wrote, "Most offered free chessboards and billiard tables, and in the ice-cold Berlin winters, guests could save a small fortune by not having to pay heating costs at home." She described early cafes as dens of iniquity, habituated by rough men and loose women. Secretly, she said, we all think of the cafe as the devil, but without the devil, there is nothing. Of course, many people viewed chess cafes as heaven on earth, sanctuaries from the rustle and bustle of daily life, and they appeared all over Europe in the 19th century. But what really made them memorable was the amazing people that frequented them. Almost every chess legend that lived during those years made the Café de la Régence their home away from home, often hanging out for hours and hours every day. The chess cafe craze reached its apex in the 19th century, and this blending of chess-loving literary figures, politicians, artists, and royalty created a milieu the likes of which was never seen again. Much like the Romantic era of art and literature, which viewed intense emotion as a form of philosophical beauty, chess players in that period prized swashbuckling attacks and brilliant tactics as a kind of emotional expression that transformed a game into true art. In this lecture, I'm going to talk about three chess legends who lived in the 19th century, which is now viewed as the Romantic period of chess. Their history is often over the top, and their games are more akin to rock'em sock'em robots than anything else. During the game, both players tossed everything, including the kitchen sink, at each other, and some kind of brutal knockout was almost assured. Of course, this didn't mean that 19th century players were hopelessly weak in positional and endgame play. They just preferred to have at it in the hope of creating something exciting and memorable. Keep in mind that in our day, a world-class game is only celebrated if both sides played well. Proven accuracy comes first, with art and depth of vision riding the back of the scientific method. However, in the 19th century, beauty and flair took precedence over accuracy. And if a swig or two of alcohol kick-started one's imagination, then why not make a toast to the chess goddess Kaisa? And yes, there is a chess goddess named Kaisa. Our first chess legend, who epitomized the Romantic era, is Joseph Henry Blackburne. His nickname, the Black Death, tells you quite a bit about the man. Born in Manchester, England in 1841, Blackburne learned how to play when he was 17 or 18 years old, and a couple of years after that became a professional player. During his astounding 50-year career, he won many strong tournaments. He gave one simultaneous exhibition after the other, and he also gave quite a few blindfold exhibitions. Blackburne's style made him a fan favorite, and he loved to attack and shock the crowds with incredible combinations. The fact that he drank heavily during games also kept the spectators milling around, since they never knew what might happen next. Actually, I'm not quite sure why he was called the Black Death. I suspect it was a mix of his violent playing style and the physical violence some of his opponents had to deal with if he downed a bit too much whiskey. Wilhelm Steinitz, the first official world chess champion, wrote about one of these physical outbursts. After a few words, Blackburne pounced upon me and hammered at my face and eyes with fullest force, about a dozen blows. But at last I had the good fortune to release myself from his drunken grip, and I broke the window pane with his head, which sobered him down a little. Here's a game Blackburne played in 1863 when he was only 22 years old. What makes it remarkable is not the fact that he was playing quite a few games at the same time, but that he was blindfolded for all of them. He just wants to wipe them out as quickly as possible, and he wants to have fun doing it. So he plays a gambit, gets his pieces out quick, and gives them attacking chances. Rapid development, open files, that's all he wants. Takes it. And now bishop takes f7 check. Of course, if the opponent takes the piece, then you win a queen. So he's not going to do that. So instead, he goes king e7. Already a bad sign, of course, because you do not want your king on e7. White plays bishop to g5 check. Okay, so of course he can't take the bishop because the bishop takes queen. So he has no choice. He has to bring his knight out, which he's happy to do, and develop a piece. And now the queen goes to h5. Notice the knight can't capture the queen because it's pinned along this line. So after queen h5, you threaten this knight to come in here. He plays c6 to keep that guy out. And rook d1. So now white's pouring all the pieces he can into the attack, trying to get something going to kill this king, which is in such a terrible position. The queen, of course, is now threatened, so the queen runs for his life, and white just keeps trying to open up lines. f4 to open up everything he can. The queen moves here, maybe to a queen check on this square. He takes it. Now the bishop guards this square, and the queen recaptures. And finally, white castles. And now if you look at this position, black's rooks are both at home. White's rooks are both just glaring right down these two files. And of course, the king position is ludicrous. So this guy has to die in some way. All right, so h6, bishop to e8. And he's trying to come in here to the f7 square with the queen. He actually threatens queen f7 mate. So bishop e8, bishop e6, and we start getting the fireworks. He sacrifices a rook. Now he sacrifices another rook. And all that just to get his queen in there. And now the king goes for a walk. No choice. Black has to keep running. This guy comes back and attacks it. Now we have a check here, and it's just brutal. King a5, b4 check. Now that square is taken away from the king. Bishop to b6 check. The final sack to open the a file. He takes it. Now the a file's open. He takes the rook with mate. Once again, an amazing game when you consider that white was blindfolded. Blackburne wrote, "Brilliancy in actual play very often prevails in spite of a flaw, the dazzling effect, as it were, rendering the flaw invisible." Here's a great example. He was giving one of his many simultaneous exhibitions, which usually features a lot of chess-loving amateurs hoping for a chance to beat a famous player. Of course, they have nothing to lose. They aren't expected to win. But if the other games take away the master's concentration, they have a chance at momentary greatness. Blackburne knew that he could mow them down, but that can easily become boring. So, seeking fun and also understanding that a loss would thoroughly delight anyone that beat him, Blackburne walked on the edge of a precipice, often making unsound moves that would lead to a brilliant finish if his opponent made the slightest mistake. And if the opponent played perfectly, which is highly unlikely, someone would leave the exhibition with a smile on his face. So, in Blackburne's mind, and in the mind of many masters that give these kinds of exhibition, a brilliant victory or a flaming defeat is, in the greater scheme of things, a win-win proposition. E4, E5, the knight comes out, knight C6, bishop C4, bishop C5. This is actually known as the Joko piano. And you can use, the most popular line actually in this position for many years was B4, but he didn't do that in this case, which is a little surprise. White instead went for this crazy gambit, just gave away a bishop to get the guy's king so it couldn't castle. And there's actually a weird name. It's called the Jerome Gambit. I don't know who named it. Maybe it's after Mr. Jerome. I don't know. Anyway, king takes f7, knight takes e5 check, giving another piece away. You take that. He recaptures the piece that just sacrificed itself. Now the queen goes all the way on the diagonal, queen check in his face. And Black could guard his knight by bringing his king up, but that's awful risky to have your king right out there. So instead, he decided, I'll give something back, but I think it'll be safer. So he goes G6, and now White takes one of his pieces back. And at this point, don't forget that Blackburne is Black. He says, I'm not going to defend. I'm the great Blackburne. I'm going to kill this guy. So instead, he starts giving away his pieces so he can take over the game. Because if you really look at it, the only thing White's developed is his queen, and Black has a bishop out. So Black goes D6, freeing this other bishop and basically forcing him to take that rook. So now White's up material, but Black has a big lead in development and goes Queen H4, threatening the F2 pawn and also guarding this other pawn on H7. So White castles, guarding everything, a very intelligent move. Now knight F6. And now Black has a lot of pieces developed, and that queen is just kind of out there all by itself and could be trapped at some point. So after knight F6, White kind of ignores everything and plays C3. The idea is that this bishop is really annoying on this diagonal, and he wants to push this pawn up here and block the bishop. Very straightforward move. Simply threatens, queen takes, H2 mate. So White says, go away. And here we go. Bishop takes F2 check. Of course, if he takes it, this would be a checkmate. So he didn't do this. That was to be too obvious. So he still thought he's probably winning. So he moved his king. And now he needs to get more pieces in the attack. So what he does is he plays bishop to F5, and suddenly the rook is attacking the queen. And so White has to take this rook. And now White's way behind in development. But that's exactly what Blackburne wanted. And now he not only sacked the rook, but he now sacks his queen. Queen takes pawn check. He has to take it. And lo and behold, bishop takes E4 mate. Lovely. Our second chess legend is Adolf Anderssen, who was one of the world's strongest players in the 1850s and 60s. He was born in 1818 in the Kingdom of Prussia, a German kingdom that includes parts of present-day Germany, Poland, Russia, Denmark, Belgium, Lithuania, and the Czech Republic. Anderssen was a quiet, very kind gentleman who was deeply respected by everyone. A mild-mannered professor of mathematics by day, when he sat at a chessboard, a metamorphosis occurred, and he turned into an unstoppable monster that feasted on the flesh of his opponent's king. Our first example of Anderssen's hyper-aggressive style, which fits in perfectly with the Romantic chess era, is something really special. It's even been given a name, the immortal game. In this position, white's a piece down already. The problem is it looks completely hopeless because his rook is hanging and the other rook is hanging by the bishop. So he's going to be incredible amounts of material down. Yet Anderssen actually was playing for this position. And he starts one of the most famous sequences in chess history. He plays bishop d6, giving away all his rooks with check. So bishop d6 is played. And now there are many moves, but the guy said, okay, I'm going to take this rook. And then instead of guarding the other rook or doing anything, he just pushed a pawn, guarding this bishop for some reason. And I'm sure the guy was like, what is he doing? So he said, let me take your other rook. I'm just going to take your whole army. And he moves his king away. And now black moves his knight here to guard this square and stop this other knight from coming in here. This knight is preventing that. And knight takes g7 check. And only now, I think, did black notice, but you have to let it happen. You can't not do it. So the king goes to d8, and queen f6 check, giving up his queen. So he's given up a piece, then he gave up both rooks, now he's giving up his queen. The guy has to take it. But by doing that, if you notice a second ago, this knight was guarding this square, so the bishop couldn't check. So by doing this move, you're forcing the knight to give up this square, and by giving it up, it allows for this move, which is checkmate. At the end of the game, white only had 3 minor pieces left versus black's 4 minor pieces, 2 rooks, and queen. Just outrageous. Our final Romantic hero is Baron Ignatz von Kolisch. This gentleman, who was born in 1837 in Pressburg, which today is Bratislava, Slovakia, somehow found himself living a romantic life even before his chess career began. After finishing his higher education in Milan and Vienna, he hooked up with a group of extremely wealthy Russians when he was 20 years old and traveled with them for a few years. This group, which included Russian Prince Sergei Yurasov, who happened to be a close friend of Leo Tolstoy, were very strong chess players. Kolisch had 2 lives. One was Kolisch the businessman. In 1868, he met Albert Salomon von Rothschild and got involved with banking, and this led to him becoming extremely wealthy. His other life was Kolisch the chess player, and he was just as successful here as he was with banking. He only played serious chess from 1860 to 1868, but during that time, he was one of the top 4 players on earth. By 1867, he was most likely the best player in the world. Kolisch's style was based on pure aggression, unleashed imagination, and brilliant tactics. Yet he was known to be an incredibly nice person. He was the definition of what a Romantic era player should be. Once again, we see a king floating in the middle. And once again, we're going to see that king suffer. Rook e1 check. The king runs for its life. Kolisch smells blood. So he doesn't want it to really go anywhere on the side. He wants to keep it in the middle. King d8 and more pieces. You need to have as many pieces as possible in these attacks. It threatens the queen, and it also brings that knight closer to the king. Queen f7. Notice that he could have played queen takes rook. The trouble is that this rook is kind of aiming at it. So what he would just do is give this bishop up and next move win the queen. So the guy avoided that. So after knight d5, he just safely kept everything together. Queen f7, hitting the knight and guarding his stuff. An intelligent move. And now Kolisch isn't going to stop. He never stops. Bishop g5 check, continuing the attack with hammer blows, one after the other. He has to take it, and knight takes g5. Now he's hanging this other piece too. So everything is kind of going. Hits the queen, knight's ready to come in, and all of a sudden White's army is pouring into the enemy position. And he plays a move he thinks would save him. He says, you know, I'm threatening his king now, right here, and I'm hitting his queen, so maybe he'll trade and I'll survive this. Okay, good luck. Knight e6 check, king d7, knight f8 check. And now, unfortunately, if he goes back, he's just getting checkmated. So, as we've seen so often, these poor guys, their king just go on these basically marches of death. So king c6, and the march begins. Knight b4 check, king b5, the a pawn hits the king, the poor king has to move towards the middle a bit, and now knight e6 is mate. Don't forget that this knight is guarded by the queen. And so another king bites the dust. By now, I hope you see that you do not want your king in the center. You have to get castled, else this is going to happen to you, and it's not fun, unless you're white, of course. One would think that black is dead lost, since his king is in the middle, and he's also a piece down. But it turns out that white's the one that's in trouble, not black. In this position, he plays knight to d4. Believe it or not, the threat is knight takes e2, checkmate. After knight d4, white retreated, and now the unbelievable knight to e4, hanging his queen. Well, his opponent got very excited, snapped it up. And now another shocking move, knight to g3. Just outrageous stuff. The threat now is rook to h1 mate. So he throws in a check, uncovering his queen here on the king, and black meets the check with a check of his own. Knight on d to e2 check. The queen has no choice, it has to take it, and when he captures the queen, it's checkmate. A really magical sequence worth looking at over and over again. He retired from chess in 1868 so he could devote himself to business. But once a person falls in love with chess, it stays with you. Kolisch demonstrated his reverence for the game by organizing and paying for several international tournaments, and he also went out of his way to help chess professionals who were in need. Sadly, being a true gentleman, being a business mogul, being a chess genius, or having all the money in the world can't save you when your time has come. And Kolisch died of kidney failure in 1889 at only 52 years of age. The story of the Turk began in 1740 when Charles VI, Holy Roman Emperor, died and his daughter, Maria Theresa, found herself on the throne. She turned out to be a brilliant empress, gave birth to 16 children, one of which was poor Marie Antoinette, and had a deep love for exhibitions that featured the hidden force known now as magnetism. There are two other ingredients that made the Turk possible. One was a gentleman named Francois Pelletier, who blew enormous crowds away with his shows on magnetism, which he presented as magical and mysterious. The other was one of the most brilliant men in history, Wolfgang von Kempelen, who was a philosopher, mathematician, and inventor of mechanical devices. These three came together in 1769 when Empress Maria Theresa invited Pelletier to come to her court and demonstrate the wonders of the hidden force. Kempelen happened to be in town, and she asked him to attend so he could explain what was happening after the exhibition ended. Once the show was over, she was beside herself with excitement and asked Kempelen's opinion. During the exhibit, he mumbled something about his being able to build something much better than anything Pelletier had to offer. So when he told her that he wasn't particularly impressed, the Empress ordered him to build something amazing and gave him 6 months to do so. Of course, building something of that magnitude in only 6 months is almost impossible. But he couldn't let the Empress down, so 6 months later, his creation was wheeled into the Viennese palace where it would be demonstrated for the first time. This was a huge affair, and the Empress sent out invitations to royals, politicians, artists, scholars, scientists, and everyone and anyone of note. The object of everyone's curiosity was called the Turk. Here's how Edgar Allan Poe described von Kempelen's invention in one of his long essays on the subject in 1836. The chess player is a figure as large as life, clothed in Turkish dress, sitting behind a large square chest or box, 3.5 feet long, 2 feet deep, and 2.5 feet high. The machine runs on casters and is either seen on the floor when the doors of the apartment are thrown open or is wheeled into the room previous to the commencement of the exhibition. The Turkish chess player sits on a chair fixed to the square chest. His right arm rests on the table, and in the left he holds a pipe, which is removed during the game, as it is with his hand that it makes the move. Actually, I think Poe's description didn't do the Turk justice. The cabinet was made of the finest wood and was stunningly beautiful. The wooden Turk was extremely imposing, and unless you were very close, looked like a real man. And the fact that it made its own moves and answered questions with head gestures created a powerful aura of life. When the Empress's audience first saw this contraption, they were in awe of its look, but immediately understood that if it was going to play chess, a child or a very small man was somehow squeezed into the cabinet. Hearing these snide murmurs, the Empress became worried and began to doubt von Kempelen. Nonetheless, the show had to go on. Anticipating the audience's reaction, von Kempelen started by opening up every part of the cabinet, showing that much of it was filled with levers and springs and gears, the same thing you would see inside a very expensive watch. It was immediately clear that even a cat wouldn't be able to squeeze into that space. The other part of the cabinet housed several chess sets and boards, boxes, and other paraphernalia. And von Kempelen, using a candle so that everything was clearly seen, showed how there just wasn't enough room for any living thing to hide in, let alone play a game of chess. Once the critics realized that their theory couldn't be true, they shut up. Then the Turk was wheeled around the room so everyone could look at it up close, and then returned it to its original location. Von Kempelen asked for a volunteer who would play the Turk a game, but the Empress picked a person herself that she knew was a skilled chess player. Suddenly, all the guests were dead quiet. The question on everybody's mind was, could this inhuman thing actually play chess? Harkness and Bottel draw us a picture of the scene. Standing in front of the automaton, the nervous volunteer heard the whirring noise of the machinery in motion, then saw the Turk's head move from side to side as though scanning the board with his eyes. After a few moments of seeming meditation, the left arm raised slowly, hovered over a pawn, then grasped it firmly with the fingers and placed it 2 squares forward. Again, the whirring sound was heard. The Turk's arm rose. The second move was made, a legal chess move, and more important, a logical one. The learned scientists in the audience moved up to get a closer view of this uncanny proceeding. The others remained rooted to their chairs, half amused, half frightened. Move by move, the weirdest game in the history of chess continued. With no visible aid from any person, this clockwork machine was performing the functions of a human mind. It was outthinking its bewildered opponent. It was obvious there was no means of communication between von Kempelen and his machine. Except to wind up the automaton, an operation he performed every 10 or 12 moves, the exhibitor remained at a distance, frequently turning his back to the Turk and conversed with spectators. The Turk made all his moves with great dignity and composure. To warn the opponent that his queen was threatened, the Turk's head bowed twice. To announce check, he bowed 3 times. At one stage of the game, the flustered opponent made an illegal move. The Turk shook his head, replaced the offending piece, and exacted a penalty by moving a piece of his own. At the conclusion of the game, von Kempelen again opened the doors of the cabinet and uncovered the figure, thereby demonstrating that no one had climbed in after the first inspection. Compelling stuff. It's not surprising that news of this impossible wonder spread all over Europe. Eventually, von Kempelen, with the Turk in tow, made his way back home, but the genie was out of the bottle, and masses of people stormed his house, demanding to see it. Initially, he complied and allowed the crowds to witness the miracle, but this got stale after a while, and he took the Turk apart, claiming that it had been damaged. Von Kempelen was finally able to concentrate on the project that was dearest to his heart, the creation of the first ever speaking machine, which he managed to successfully build in 1804. Von Kempelen died a short time after his speaking machine was finished. Of course, the secret of the Turk was indeed a person hidden deep in the cabinet. When the Turk was resurrected and eventually sold to Mr. Johann Meisel in 1804, he hired a very strong player named Jacques Moret to be the Turk's brain. Poor Moret had to squeeze himself into a space so small that an average-sized dog would be claustrophobic. Imagine being stuck in something that's cramped. Play without sight of the board, since there's no room for a chess set. You'd have to move the levers which controls the Turk, play long games in sweltering heat, make absolutely no noise, and still play world-class chess. Meisel, the new owner of the Turk, eventually took it to England and then America, where the Turk continued to blow people's minds. The wild ride ended when, in 1854, the Turk was destroyed in a Philadelphia fire. Napoleon Bonaparte, who was a huge chess fan, played the Turk in Vienna, 1809. He was wiped out in just 16 moves. In this position, black's pieces are obviously a lot better than white's. They're advancing on the enemy king, they're advancing in the middle, he's doing very well. And one would love to know if Napoleon was worried or if his ego insisted that he's always better. Who knows? Anyway, at this point, Turk, which of course is supposed to be a machine without any real feelings or thoughts, decided to finish him off. Knight takes h3 check. He moved his king. He didn't want to take it because he's going to get his queen and king forked. So white just moved his king up, queen h4. And now, of course, white's king is getting completely clobbered. So he now has to play g3. The other knight comes in, check. Now he's being smothered by 3 pieces, and don't forget this bishop over here on c5. That's 4 pieces going after him. King g2, knight f4, check. King takes f3, queen check, g4, and mate, and the game's over. One would love to know what Napoleon's feelings were at this point. We'll finish our Turk tales with one final story. When the Turk showed up in Amsterdam, the King of Holland offered 3,000 francs, which in those days was a very large sum, for a game against the machine. Meisel, the new owner, was delighted and made the usual preparations, one of which was to make sure his hidden player, Moret, got plenty of rest. When the time came for Moret to crawl into the chest, he was a no-show. Running to Moret's room, he found his player in bed, trembling due to some sort of convulsions. Here's their conversation, starting with Meisel. "What's wrong?" "I have a fever." "You were perfectly well a few hours ago." "This is a sudden attack." "But the king is on his way. You have to play." "Tell him to go back home." "What reason should I give him?" "Tell him that the Turk has a fever." "What kind of nonsense is this? Enough already. Get up." "Impossible." "Okay, I'll call a doctor." "It won't help." "Is there anything I can do to cure your fever?" "Yes, there is one cure and one cure only." "What is it?" "Pay me the 1,500 francs you owe me." "Okay, I'll give it to you this evening." "No, I want it now." So Meisel gave the money to Moret. A miracle cure occurred right before Meisel's eyes, and the match against the king went smoothly. What's interesting is the king didn't actually play. He had his minister of war play the game, and the king gave advice for every move. After the Turk crushed them, The king blamed the minister for the defeat.